Well,
Yeah.
let me say a few words about that and about modernity. And I think, yes, I think you're right about colonialism being implicit within modernity, but perhaps even more so is science, actually. And because many of the criteria of science are also, you know, what we think of as the essence of modernity. And I think that colonialism was sort of like the empirical, I suppose, laboratory. Really, it's like using the world as a laboratory, and you know, and it's definitely on record that the West, or the Western European voyages of discovery, certainly resourced and supported the rise of science in Western Europe. There's no, like, we can't get outside of epistemology, can we? We can't sit somewhere, we can't do the God trick and sort of examine different ways of thinking or of being human. But, you know, one thing that I find, another thing that I find is often overlooked is the notion that curriculum, the actual concept of curriculum, is itself a product of the technicist, modernist way of thinking. So just as, I mean, you can't separate colonialism from the rise of science, but those big historical processes also happened at the same time as the disciplines of the academy were being laid down, right? Because I mean, science and maths and philosophy are ancient, and literature, but they certainly came into their current form in that same period of centuries during the age of the rise of science and the rise of Western colonization of the rest of the world, if you will. So I guess that comes back to the idea of the hyphen or the hybridity, because if you take seriously these ideas that, or this kind of set of ideas that we've just been mapping about how Indigenous knowledge has been excluded, and that calls into question whether we can just poke it back in, then that is, for me, if you take the difficulty of that seriously, then I think that helps you to see that there will always be a kind of a tension or a gap or some kind of rubbing point, shall we say, when between cultures in their full extent. So that's, you know, that notion of the hyphen, can I say that you know, that's a theoretical concept, and it was first used in the context of the Māori-Pākehā relationship by my good friend Alison Jones, who is a Pākehā scholar, has just released her biography called Being Pākehā, This Unsettled Life. I might have that just not quite right, but it's something like that, where she traces her own personal history of encountering Māori as a Pākehā New Zealander and coming into relationship with Māori. Now, I should say that white New Zealanders who choose to consider themselves or identify themselves as Pākehā are almost sort of, by that very naming, placing themselves in relationship with Māori, if that makes sense.